I'm trying to go for some black metal ambiance. I thought it would be fun to record this by candlelight because I feel like it fits the mood that I'm going for this video. Today we are going to take a trip through the labyrinth, the catacombs of black metal, spanning the decades and spanning a lot of different countries. Ultimately, my goal with this video is to shine a light on some of the history and importance that these bands brought to the black metal world in one way or another. Now, just as a forewarning, I don't think we're gonna agree on all of these, but I highly suggest that you guys let me know in the comments section below the black metal bands that you think were the most influential. And without further ado, I'm going to start the list with Profanatica. Profanatica is an American black metal band, and in fact they were one of the first American black metal bands, and one of the bands that really challenged the conceptual norms of what American black metal could be. There was kind of this push throughout the decades that Americans ruined black metal, that it was supposed to be true Norwegian, true cult, and that if it didn't come from the Scandinavian region, or at least like the Balkan region, one or the other, that it was automatically going to be inferior to the true product. If black metal was in Breaking Bad, Walter White's product was Norwegian. It was the blue shit. And anything else came second to that. And at a time when it was very tumultuous to experiment in black metal, and a lot of times that could draw some criticism and kind of make you an outsider and get ostracized in the community depending on where you were coming from, American black metal obviously got a lot of shit, but Profanatica have been able to pretty much stand the test of time with their extremely raw take on black metal. Profanatica are very influential when it comes to the development of American black metal, specifically a lot of solo projects, and most notably a lot of raw black metal. So much so that their take on brittle and sharp, rawly produced black metal inspired bands not just from America, but paved the way for so many other bands and solo projects across the entire world. So this black metal was not touched up, it was not pretty, it was not effervescent, and quite the contrary, it was very cold and very unwelcoming, and I believe that they definitely deserve their spot at the table with the most influential black metal bands. The next project in our ghoulish assembly here is Passage d'Hiver, coming out of Switzerland. So this is a Swiss solo black metal project that has been on the tongues of a lot of black metal fans, but to people that are maybe new to the genre may not understand how influential this project has been. This is a solo project from one Vinther, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and he has been one of the biggest proponents of taking his time in a composition. Throughout his field recordings and dark ambient infused black metal releases that are also infused with a lot of icy cold synths all of the 1990s, like the late 1990s Norwegian scene specifically, and just that general area that was dabbling in symphonics and synths and that sort of stuff. Very, very ice cold, but it's the compositions that really bring me back to Passage d'Hiver's work as being very influential, because most of the time black metal hasn't really been notable for being a genre that is super adventurous in terms of length. Most of the time black metal has been just pretty middle of the pack in terms of they're not so long as a funeral doom metal band, but they're not so short as like a grindcore or some classic death metal bands have been. But Passage d'Hiver challenges that with records that are hours worth of material, some of which breach the 2-hour mark. These are literal cinematic theatrical movies. And the amalgamation of all of these different influences that kind of came together to create Passage d'Hiver's icy sound and very raw sound not only inspired a lot of low fidelity black metal projects, but also tested the limits of how long you could make a composition, and I think that is a big testament to why Passage d'Hiver has been just such a prolific project and such a great one that has garnered a lot of acclaim in the black metal world for quite some time now. Before we go any further in this list, one thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to talk a little bit about a lot of the usual suspects that you are going to expect to see on this list and just kind of knock them out in one fell swoop. Obviously, Venom and Bathory were the two instrumental bands that crafted what is now known as black metal. It's largely debated on which one came first. It's kind of like saying Death versus Possessed, but there are also other bands that influenced early black metal. King Diamond is a big example of this, as he pretty much influenced a lot of extreme metal, but it came down to Venom and Bathory. Venom took a lot more of a classic speed metal and kind of early thrash metal style to it, as did a lot of early death metal and black metal, whereas Bathory was a lot closer to what you would later identify as being firmly black metal, with its blasphemous lyricism and just general focus on satanic imagery and very sharp lo-fi production was very synonymous with what black metal could become in the future. And then when you're talking about the Scandinavian scene, there are a lot of bands that you could talk about. Emperor was instrumental in infusing symphonic elements with black metal with their record In the Nightside Eclipse, garnering a ton of acclaim in the metal world and the black metal world at the time, challenging conventional norms, because while we kind of anticipate black metal to be infused with other things now, and it is pretty normalized, that was not how it was at one point. And if anything, if you stepped out of the confinements of black metal, unless you were like a dark ambient project, it really was unheard of to infuse these things, and Emperor was obviously the biggest to do it. And then of course you have big names like Darkthrone and Mayhem and Immortal, which are all massive names in early black metal and majorly influential to hundreds upon thousands of copycat bands that have tried to revitalize the style over the year. And without projects like Mayhem, who are still kicking it now and creating some great music now and again, you would not have such a major basis for the culture war that happened in the Norwegian black metal scene. And projects that came from early Darkthrone, like the Transylvanian Hunger era of Darkthrone, were massively influential to the development of a lot of black metal bands. And then of course you gotta sing some praises for Immortal as well. While they weren't like the most infused with a lot of the drama that was happening at the time, if you want to call it that, they were still a very instrumental portion of early black metal, at least that specific wave, and led to a lot of bands in the second and third wave taking hints from them in the process. So now that I got those out of the way, we can continue the list with some of the maybe less obvious bands. So going from there, a project that I feel like definitely needs a lot of praise sung is Agalloch. This is probably another band that would maybe be on the tip of people's tongues, and you could kind of lump them in a little bit with Opeth and how they challenged black metal by infusing different elements like folk metal and ambient music and a lot of pretty instrumentation into their records. The Mantle, in my opinion, is a crown jewel, if not the crown jewel of black metal. When it comes to atmospheric black metal, there is no end to the amount of influence that Agalloch had on the entire scene. Agalloch took the metal world by storm and showed that black metal could not only be very pretty and meticulous, but still raw and unwavering in its intensity and its ferocity, without compromising some of those hallmarks of early black metal. It felt raw, it felt aggressive, a record that is just absolutely oozing with quality, and their entire discography is so full to the brim of creative ideas that tested the limits of what black metal could really be without sacrificing the initial roots of the genre. The next one on my list is going to be Summoning. Of course it's Summoning. Oh man, okay, so this band is from Austria, and if you are unfamiliar with them, it is very difficult to describe the type of music that they make. They are a very Lord of the Rings and high fantasy inspired atmospheric black metal band, with a lot of dark ambient tendencies and some of the weirdest instrumentation you'll ever hear. It really wasn't like anything at the time, and it has inspired so many bands, not the least of which is like Caladan Brood, who are a fantastic band. Wish we could get another record. But Summoning kind of deviating from all of the normal blasphemous imagery and satanic imagery of black metal and the anti-societal stuff, and putting in its place a very high fantasy approach, almost similar to the lyrics and imagery that you could see from like power metal bands, is such an amazing combination. And they struck gold with their records. Their record Minas Morgul is one of the coolest black metal records you'll ever hear in your life. I highly suggest it if you haven't checked it out already. But kind of like how Agalloch tested the limits of atmosphere from like a folk department and just generally making black metal very pretty, Summoning tested the limits with a whole different type of atmosphere, and it really shows the spectrum of how atmospheric black metal can be so diverse and versatile, even if it falls under the same category. And that's one reason that black metal is one of my favorite subgenres of metal just as a whole, is how widespread it is when it comes to its influences, but it can still fall under the same umbrella. It's really intriguing to me. A band that I almost included in sort of the these are a given, but I didn't want to because I feel like compared to a lot of the names I listed, this is a name that's popular, but also one that I think deserves a little bit more, and that is Celtic Frost. Celtic Frost came around at the time of a lot of these mainstay hallmark black metal bands, and yet even though you hear them brought up a lot, I feel like they're not brought up as contemporarily as those other bands when it comes to the influence that they had, and this mostly comes down to just how diverse their influences were. At a time in black metal similar to Emperor, where you weren't really seeing experimentation, all of their works are all over the place. They have influence from death metal and speed metal and thrash metal and black metal, and it all comes together in this very experimental sort of way. And it was kind of hard to find other experimental black metal bands from that time, because most of them were pretty straightforward, and even if they were ingenious and original and exhilarating and just overall thrilling at the time, looking back, when you look back on some of Celtic Frost discography, the influence that it had on so many different genres is something that a lot of those early black metal bands can't necessarily say. Next up, we're going to heavy aggression. I have two bands here. I have Blasphemy and I have Revenge. So Revenge obviously got their start in the 2000s, but Blasphemy have been around for a very long time, and they've gotten themselves into a fair amount of trouble with their aggressive live performances and their notorious violent tendencies. And pretty much Blasphemy was the main band that caused the start of what is now known as war metal. And if you are unfamiliar with war metal, it is pretty much the cacophonous, non-stop onslaught version of black metal hopped up on steroids and taken to the moon and back. It is so violent, it is so in your face. Most of the time the production is just relentless, it doesn't let up whatsoever, and the instrumentation just backs up that cacophony with heavy instrumentation all around. There's no room to breathe, there's no prettiness here, there's no atmosphere here, but it usually isn't that lo-fi. But if you're talking about the classic record Fallen Angel of Doom by Blasphemy, this record took black metal in a direction that it had not been to prior. And that is saying something, considering how archaic and primitive and primal a lot of early black metal was at the time. So when you have a band that challenged even that and made it even heavier, it's kind of like how Carcass took early grindcore and made gore grind with their first few releases by taking something that was already in its infancy and extreme and branching that off into even more of an onslaught, even more of just an antagonistic genre that is meant to get all up in your business, all up in your shit, and just pretty much say, fuck you, I don't care how you feel, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I feel about society. And Blasphemy, compared to a lot of war metal bands, I'm not going to say that war metal bands don't necessarily walk the walk or talk the talk, but when you look at Blasphemy and you look at their timeline and some of the controversies that they have had that have caused them to be pretty polarizing, you can't say that they don't live the lifestyle that they are going for. And the next band is going to be Agalloch. Fucking Thrak. These guys are from England and they are incredible. Agalloch Thrak, kind of like Celtic Frost, is on this list for what they did for black metal's versatility and how they challenged the norms of what you could infuse with black metal. How do you nail down Agalloch Thrak? It's nearly impossible. They're a blackened industrial death metal band with so many different influences coming at the same time. No one can doubt how brutal they are, but industrial music being infused with black metal, that's crazy. That doesn't feel like it should work, but it's kind of makes sense considering there is a lot of industrial metal that came from that side of the world, so it fits like a glove more often than not. The factory type sounds being mixed in with black metal and death metal and being so constant, it is really unrelenting and it is fun as hell. So Agalloch Thrak are pretty much on this list because they showed a completely unfamiliar style the way into black metal, mixed that into the witch's cauldron, and the end result was something that was really worthwhile. Alright, gremlins, you need to get up close for this one. Once upon a time, there was a man so infamous in the scene that he strikes terror in the hearts of those who dare utter his name. A cultural centerpiece that caused so many bands to come from his influence. Not only that, but his mere actions caused an entire pariah story of being an outcast surrounding him, so much so that people worship him as a messiah. Yeah, I mean, did you guys really think Burzum wasn't going to be here? I plan on doing an entire video dedicated to Burzum and the history of Varg, but I don't think I need to introduce Varg to any of y'all. He is one of the most, if not the most infamous figures in all of black metal and one of the most controversial figures in all of metal, period. So he is on this list for two reasons. His influence on the scene and the general vibe of it, I don't think that you could even count the amount of people on, like, if you had thousands of hands, the amount of people people that adopted his philosophy when it came to black metal. When it comes to the outsider, isolated culture that black metal usually embodies, yes, you could chalk a lot of that up to Dead and Necrobutcher and Euronymous, but it was Varg's counterculture and how violently in opposition he was to the church system, his support of the church burnings, how he participated in things, his murdering of Euronymous, his prison sentence, how he literally started pretty much a neo-Nazi coalition in prison, how he came out of prison and started to really just ride the lightning when it comes to getting this cult of personality surrounding him to where he has a flock of sheep that will cast a shadow down on you if you even so dare to criticize anything about his life whatsoever. His reputation obviously precedes him, and black metal would not be the same without him, but it is not even just because of the cultural significance to him, because it extends past that as well. It also goes to how he approached his songwriting. And once again, that's pretty complex because he influenced a ton of black metal, he influenced a ton of dark ambient infused black metal and dark ambient as a whole, but it's also the lyricism. Yeah, I don't care how you feel about Varg, he really influenced a lot of NSBM in how he approached his songwriting, and you can disagree with that, but that's just straight up objective. So honestly, just all of this wrapped up into one, if I had to say the sole person that influenced black metal the most outside of like the very classic bands like Venom, Bathory, Celtic Frost, King Diamond, it would have to be Burzum, hands down. The next project I'm going to be talking about is Ulver. So this is kind of a weird pick because I know that Ulver kind of changed their style after a while and weren't just solely a black metal project after a while, but that's kind of the exact reason I include them here. I'm a staunch advocate for Ulver's dark ambient and neo-folk records over their just straight black metal records. I think they're a lot more ethereal and beautiful and really interesting, but it's the transitional period that really kind of strikes me as awesome, and even early Ulver was really cool, and I think I've seen Ulver mentioned a lot as an influence for a lot of black metal bands that incorporate symphonic elements and cold synths as well as just general vibes of neo-folk and dark ambient music. So they're just kind of like a little shout out I wanted to get that I don't think necessarily get their praises in terms of their influence on black metal. Another hardcore staple in the American black metal scene, Xasthur pretty much birthed a lot of modern DSBM. The way that he approached sadness and sorrowfulness, it obviously had been touched upon prior. Black metal has notoriously had a past of being very sad and mournful and just having a general reek of desperation and depression and anxiety and social isolation, social alienation. So these themes of pure nihilism were obviously tested, but Xasthur took it to the limit. Scott Malefic is a crazy man, and even though I think it's like baby's first DSBM and is very entry level, the sheer influence that Xasthur had on DSBM and getting so many people into that style of music as a gateway, it is immeasurable. Another American black metal project I want to talk about is Wolves in the Throne Room. So they predated the whole Death Heaven thing, and when it came to Blackgaze as a general vibe and a general genre, Wolves in the Throne Room were one of the first bands to really kind of test that a little bit. It wasn't on full display in the same way that a band like Alcest or a band like Death Heaven would embody in their material, but Wolves in the Throne Room, when it comes to that new wave of American black metal, they not only did it with grace and they did it with no remorse, but they also were pretty experimental and laid a lot of the groundwork for what would later become Blackgaze as we know it. And I also think that they have some pretty cool ambient works too, which is pretty damn cool. Which leads me on to my next point. Death Heaven obviously has to be on this list too. I feel like Death Heaven is the single black metal band that got the most amount of people into black metal. You could obviously argue that a band like Opeth or a band like maybe Dimmu Borgir or specifically Cradle of Filth did that better, but oh my lord, if you were around and listening to black metal when Death Heaven blew up on the scene, dear God, you could not escape Sunbather. Every publication, every review, every N-Year list, every reviewer, every YouTuber, everywhere you went, it was a cultural phenomenon. It was more than a musical zeitgeist. It was literally dictating the entire tempo of extreme metal at the time in a way that you really have not seen since, except for a couple of more mainstream releases. Suddenly, black metal was on a major stage, and also testing the limits of pretty much putting the antithesis of black metal metal alongside black metal, a genre like shoegaze, although it isn't so far removed, and I will never understand people that say that it will, considering dark ambient and ambient music has been lumped in with black metal since the first pretty much few records and big bands. But yeah, Deafheaven's influence with so many black metal bands that never would have become a band otherwise, because they found it inspirational that they were able to test the limits, and also just how many people they got into black metal and extreme music at the time have to make this list. And while we're at it, one of the most controversial black metal bands that I want to say is very influential and very important to the scene, in my opinion, Liturgy. So Liturgy is important for quite a few reasons. Obviously, the elephant in the room and the reason that Liturgy garnered a lot of hate and ammunition used against them is the fact that their frontwoman is a trans woman and came out during the existence of Liturgy when they were already one of the most polarizing, controversial, and hated bands in all of black metal. And regardless of if you think it's an opinion or not, I don't really want to argue with that. I'm not here to talk about the identity thing, but that is a very important thing. And I'd be foolish to not mention that that sort of exposure and that sort of validation and affirmation in a community that is notoriously hostile to people that are a part of that community is a very important way of just standing your ground and showing that you can create that. But the main reason that Liturgy got a lot of shit before that was because Liturgy has always been transcendental black metal, and they've always embodied the blast beat, and there is a level of pretentiousness to it in a way that kind of a progressive metal band would be. But Liturgy got so many purists and purebloods mad for the hyper clean production style, for how clean everything sounded and sanitized, how it wasn't trying to be like the old school bands at all, and there was practically no trace whatsoever of the classic Norwegian hallmark of bands. So if you think that Deafheaven got people mad because it was poser or normie music, when Liturgy first started to blow up, and specifically around like the Aesthetica days, it was like no other controversy I've seen in modern black metal. People were rioting about it, and there was simultaneously people on one side being like, wow, black metal is fresh, this is so cool, black metal has been stagnant for so long and just been clinging to the same things, finally we're getting some bands that are willing to pierce through that a little bit and do something intriguing and unique. And then on the other side you had a bunch of purists and people that just didn't like them waving their finger around saying, fuck no, why are we getting this experimentation, this sounds stupid, this is pretentious, this goes against everything that black metal is supposed to be. So obviously their quality control wasn't really being met up to their standards. But kind of around the same time that Deafheaven made a lot of waves a little bit later, Liturgy is a very important step when it came to modern black metal and testing the confinements and kind of making people a little uncomfortable, making them have to kind of look inside themselves a little bit and debate with this inner conflict and face certain things in black metal that you don't usually have to be faced with. And I think that kind of is a cool way to diversify, not only as a community within black metal, but just as a whole. It is a really fascinating thing to see how people react on different levels and on such a spectrum with these challenging notions being brought into black metal, both from an identity perspective, but also just Liturgy as a whole, as a band, musically, what they stand for, their philosophical outlook. But I have been talking for so damn long, I think it's time to wrap this video up. I could talk about dozens of more bands. I would love to make more videos in this series, not just for black metal, but other bands, but you can let me know down in the comment section below if you agree or disagree with my takes in this video. I would absolutely love to hear your opinions on this and what your list would be in terms of the black metal bands you think are the most influential, underground or mainstream or otherwise. And you can let me know if you'd like to see more videos in this style, because I would love to do it. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.